while since I've done just a regular vlog catching people up on what's going on with me now. And I also have decided that I am now ready to start talking about my 7 months incarcerated and forcibly committed. I learned a lot about the systems that poor people are under in our country, especially in rural areas. Something that kept me going while I was locked up for 7 months was journaling and writing about my experiences. Some of the journals I brought with me, but because my own attorney had me forcibly committed, I destroyed most of my journals because I was fearful of giving any toehold. So if you have a journal entry that says, had trouble sleeping last night because the girls were talking until 5 in the morning, that would be like a very common experience in jail. But a clinician who's maybe looking to forcibly impose a state hold without evidence might say, oh, patient has insomnia, maybe patient is manic. And I know that sounds paranoid, but you've got to be very suspicious once you've been forcibly committed without having symptoms of mental illness. So it's kind of my right. But so I want to start talking about that. Part of the reason I waited was because ideally I wanted to pay off the court-imposed fees. The judge who did this to me still could have me arrested if he decides I'm not paying my fees fast enough. Or so I'm close, but I'm not there. And I do think it's content that people are interested in. Not a lot of people who are sharing on Instagram and YouTube are talking about incarceration from a firsthand experience. So I kind of want to share that. And my goal is always clickbait. I just want to get people to advocate for me and my sons. It's kind of two-part, right? I'm trying to stay alive. So usually that means some kind of online income, so clickbait for that. But the end goal is I'm staying alive for Angus and Teddy, my sons. Everything is for Angus and Teddy, for getting justice for them and justice for me. I haven't been able to talk to my sons or see them in 4 years because I testified about corruption in Cook County Family Court. That's what this channel is about. I'm still going to be publishing on a weekly basis content about the core issue, but I also just want to share my personal experience. And if seeing some old white lady talk about Jalen will get clicks and get people to talk about corrupt family court judges, I'm game for it. I joke a lot about being a crazy lady, but I don't believe that. I'm also well trained in liberal niceties. So what I mean is, I don't identify as someone who exhibits symptoms of a mental illness. I do not identify as a survivor of insert mental illness. Nobody's ever diagnosed me with one. I've been very high functioning up until I became a federal witness. So I still believe there's a through line from Megan Mason, who was born 48, almost 49 years ago, and the Megan Mason who the Illinois judiciary says is crazy, whose family, along with her ex-husband, says she's crazy, and the state of Michigan says is crazy. I don't see myself that way. And some people visit my page who have known me my whole life and know me in the other contexts that I might talk about here. And I'm sure they're very curious. And one funny kind of turn, I don't know if people realize this, when I was a senior in high school, I was a theater geek, and I got a really good role. I was the lead in a play called The Insanity of Mary Gerard. And it was about this woman in 18th century Philadelphia, a real woman. And as is still the case, it was some sort of domestic violence situation. Her husband was rich. He wanted to be with his mistress, so he had Mary committed to a mental institution. And to raise funds at that time, the mental patients would be like in a room where people could come by and watch them. And And it was cool because I was the lead and I got to wear costumes that made my tits look really good, which I cared about when I was 17. And but it was funny because the concept of a woman who's sane being forcibly committed is something that had been in my consciousness for a long time. In the winter of 2021, there was in my children's schools, there was a secondary COVID lockdown. They had been in person, and so I was trying to kill time with, especially my older son, who has severe developmental disabilities. He doesn't entertain himself, so it's good to have a really full schedule. And so I was taking him to libraries all around the Cook County Library System, and I found this new book by Kate Moore, and I knew the name, Radium Girls. I knew the name from the Netflix series, and so I knew she was a respected author, and then I started reading about it, and it was called The Woman They Could Not Silence, I think. I'm going to put it up here. But anyway, it's about a woman named Elizabeth Packard, who is an early founder of the women's first wave feminist movement, and she she was married to a Springfield minister who was kind of a grifter. He had bankrupted the family, was kind of running them into the ground, and they had a falling out over a theological difference. Some church that their opinions on slavery were being formed. Her husband, who had bankrupted them and was abusive, was coming out pro-slavery. Elizabeth Packard examined her conscience and examined the Bible, prayed, and came to the decision that the Lord doesn't want us enslaving other people. And she said this publicly. And her husband decided to have her forcibly committed because she was crazy for religious delusions. So like me, like Mary, she was locked up and she wasn't exhibiting any symptoms of mental illness except for saying things that other people who were more powerful and hold the keys to her jail cell decided were untrue. That is the through line. So yeah, before I was forcibly committed, that was something that was in my consciousness. But I was somebody who felt I had a lot of social power. I had come to that because I grew up acutely aware of especially economic distinctions, power distinctions, because I grew up with cultural capital. I had access to very good public schools, really good public schools. I had access to people in my family who had gone to college, so I understood a trajectory outside of poverty. But my day-to-day experience was very impoverished in a way that you don't have so much anymore. I didn't have a phone until I was 8. And when I was 3, my mom lost her job and we lived in a tent for 9 months. And so unless you're like a redneck, you don't really understand a form of poverty where it's kind of going to land when you're very poor. You just you don't have electricity or plumbing, and you just figure it out. And most people don't live like that. Most people in urban areas who have experienced homelessness live in shelters. Women and children often live with family. We would live in people's backyards sometimes. But it's usually people aren't quite as materially isolated. Also it was legal always, like as soon as it stopped being freezing outside, it was legal to turn off the hot water. So summers meant like no electricity and cold showers and porch with full of garbage because my mom couldn't pay for trash collection, so we never used the back porch, and a lot of violence in the community. I was harmed and sexually abused but more by family babysitters, not my family member, home babysitters, nice Baptist lady houses. I was never abused in daycare or school. That's why I like institutions a little better. And I grew up in a town called Holland, Michigan, which when I was growing up was very conservative. Traditionally, it's Calvinist, Christian Reformed, which is an interesting form of conservatism that had a lot to do with forming, like New York, that's the Dutch as well, and the New England ethos. It's a lot about public service, good works. That varies sharply from today's form of like Christian nationalism that is based solely on, it's always been a fundamentalist premise that all you have to do is confess your sins to God and you're okay. It does often appeal to people who have a hard time being good because they just have to do it once. So, a lot of people who actually want to do good works on a day-to-day basis think about them on a day-to-day basis, not just when they're saved, in my opinion. The town where I grew up was very conservative, but it was also inclusive in ways that other conservative Protestant movements aren't. My town was very much influenced by rapid immigration. So I think it went from it's called Holland, so a lot of Dutch people, to 30% immigrants from Southeast Asia, Latin America. And I grew up really benefiting from the influx of people. For one thing, there was always investment in schools. They were building schools. There was a sense of newness. We had international festivals to celebrate the immigrants. And most importantly, unlike the bikers and the rednecks, the immigrants were really safe to be around. So you could go to work, or my mom could go to work and know that the Cambodians next door would take care of me, unlike the bikers next door. That's rural poverty for some people who aren't racist. So that also had a liberalizing impact. So my county went from Republican to consistently Democrat, and the kind of leader that we used to have doesn't even really exist anymore. It was Fred Upton, Congressman Myers. They're both in certain ways very conservative, but very not racist, in my opinion. And also, I was always liberal. My mom was raised Catholic. She was very much an FDR, JFK, rah-rah, Team Blue Democrat. And that's how I was raised. I was a passionate Dukakis supporter. I know there aren't a lot of people like that, but I was, because I would wind up being radicalized when I went to college over the issue of the death penalty. I hate the death penalty. I formed my hatred of the death penalty in high school when I learned, it just infuriated me when I learned that the state can murder people and it doesn't reduce crime rates. It doesn't save money. It's just the state murdering people. And even, in the 90s, it wasn't the Tea Party, but the Republican message was all about, oh, you can't trust big government. Oh, how could big government deliver your mail? It's like, you can't trust big government to bring me my grandma's birthday card, but I can trust big government to kill black people? No, I don't like that. And the Democrats abandoned that issue, and that was when I learned our team isn't always right. And that's an important thing to learn. So I grew up a political minority in a town with a growing, diverse population, and I felt very safe to express my opinions. It didn't make me cool. The Christian youth group directors didn't love my opinions, but I wasn't joining their youth groups. I was active at my school, active in theater, and a good student, so I felt safe to have my opinions. Nobody ever talked about partisan violence. They would pray around the flagpole and loved war things, loved the flag, but they never talked about killing people like me. And that was rather nice. I think that's a good way to grow up. And I think you can be a conservative town and not kill the liberals. So that was a nice experience. and Fred Upton came to speak to my civics class. And, we talked about different political positions. It was okay to debate issues. And I'm really grateful that I grew up in that environment and understand that it doesn't have to be so partisan, and that a working class Michigan town can benefit from immigrants and the people who support them. I don't know why the system used to be different. I really don't know the granular details, but my sense was that the refugee families from Cambodia and Southeast Asia were generally sponsored by churches. I do think there was a sense of willingly the community privately supporting families. And I feel like that, so for somebody like me who, we were white and poor, it's one thing to have the government say, oh, we're going to help only people who are immigrants. That feels very alienating if you're not getting the same kind of help. But if it's coming from private organizations, then I don't think it's as divisive. That's just my opinion, that might be some way to take the tension. I don't like the anti-immigrant movements at all. If I had my way, I would have very lax immigration standards, but I know America is at a different place. But I think if people had benefited from immigrant communities like I did and had really kind immigrant neighbors who helped them, I think maybe there would be more people advocating for them now. But I would say, so I was known in my town for being liberal, broke, white trash, depends how you want to frame it. But I think the biggest thing I was known for was being very smart. That was something, and it's always obnoxious to say that, but that was something that my mom cared very much about. My mom taught me to read when I was 2.5, and I was writing stories when I was 4, and I was in programs for the gifted, and I was, from the time I was very young, it was clear that there was a path for me, and I was going to college. I wouldn't have to pay for college, and that was true. And I also, like I said, I think it's a testament. I mean, I had a narcissistic mother who wanted to be the mother of a gifted daughter, so that's partly why I got to be really smart. But also, I was in a town that had that really invested in our public schools. Small class size, teachers who were just really excited to be there and good at their jobs. So my town had 30,000 people, and 4 of the seniors in my class, including me, were National Merit finalists. That's a pretty high number for that size town. And I think it was in large part because we benefited from the influx of immigrants. It was also a diverse economy. There's truck farming because our microclimate lets people grow fruit. There's the furniture industry. That's what my family did, made furniture. And then there's the service industry. That's what I did before I would go to college. I would wait tables in Saugatuck for rich Chicago people to pay us tips. And people would clean rich Chicago people's houses for tips. And it was good money. Or sell rich Chicago people houses. That's good money too. But I think it's just important to mention that not because I'm so clever, believe me because of what I said, but because of the way I moved through the world up until I was forcibly committed. There were often times where I might be in a situation where I might know things or understand things that are confusing or not known to other people. And up until I was forcibly committed, I would just assume there's a misunderstanding. Or maybe I know something that they don't understand. And that changed. It was framed as if somebody who graduated from medical school isn't familiar with the Federal Racketeering and Corrupt Influencers Act, then I must be making it up. But I wasn't really vulnerable to internalizing that or falling under, falling in line and just being like, yes, I was so crazy, give me drugs. I really regret what I did. I mean, I would have been out in 2 weeks probably if I'd done that. But I wasn't gonna lie. I mean, I lost my kids for telling the truth. I'm gonna lie to suffer here instead of suffering in jail? No, fuck that. That wasn't gonna happen. So I the only real danger was in me doubting myself, and um, the lucky thing about being institutionalized is I was on camera constantly for 7 months. So I know that there wasn't a moment where someone could say that I was acting bizarre or needed some sort of intervention because I was on tape the whole time. So I'm pretty comfortable with my thesis that they misdiagnosed me and I shouldn't have been locked up. But yeah, it sounds arrogant, but let's say, so when I'm in Carroll Hospital, I don't know, there's like 200 people living there or something, and then 500 staff, so 700 staff. The staff are good there, most of them. Some were assholes, but that's any workplace, right? But, and in general, they were I thought they were well educated, high school graduates, but well educated high school graduates and good at their jobs, well trained. But I would imagine out of those 700 people, I'm probably the only person who's taken multivariable calculus. Now, that doesn't mean that I was the only person living in 3 dimensions. It just means that at Carroll Hospital, if I had written out the quadratic equation and said, I have this system of symbols and numbers that I can use to determine the volume around me, that is just describing multivariable calculus. But since nobody there knows multivariable calculus, it could also just be a psychotic woman thinking she's a wizard. I think the moral of this story is maybe don't lock bitches up unless you have a really good reason. But I guess we'll see what your conclusion is. I don't know, maybe you think I am really crazy and you'll troll me. That works. Anything to get attention. Like I said, this is clickbait. I want people to bring justice to my sons, Angus and Teddy. And I need to eat while that's happening. And so I will just tell you my weird stories. And hopefully we'll figure out a proposition that works for all of us.